Hi, welcome to my channel where we question everything. Today is the topic of Crosstalk and the game changer. Now, as you know, the game changer, as mentioned in my previous videos, is our Scott Ritter, and he was yesterday on the show of Crosstalk with Peter. So I like Peter and I like Peter's show, and they have said many things which I totally agree with. And in the first section, they asked again for Scott Ritter, his opinion on the operation in Ukraine, and he still mentions the game-changing type of phenomena in this conflict. And he always refers back to the European supplies of armament and the financial support that actually is provided. And while he mentioned that the Americans alone have already provided something like 56 or 57 billion dollars to the Ukrainian or Ukraine, but if you really dissect it, you will only find that it's about, I think, 13 or 14 billion in armaments that the Americans have supplied. Now, whether that's a correct number or not, I don't know. Only the real people will know, because I know that there were some weapons delivered to Ukraine by the Americans, which were never listed in any report. So it's a debatable point, but still, it's only a portion of the money. And the general consensus is that this whole military exercise in Ukraine and the resistance that Ukraine is showing is mostly a money laundering operation. Because most of the money actually doesn't go to Ukraine. Because if you look at recent, well, for a long time actually, at the aid of America providing to the world and the poorer countries, that money never reaches actually those countries. All the money is spent in America, and then goods are delivered. So the American economy is first and foremost and benefits from these things. But I'm digressing again. At least in the second half of the program, it talked a little bit more sense about the economic impact and the suicide mission that Europe is doing from on an economic point of view. And I can agree with that in a certain sense. But the game-changing issue has to stop. It's an error that Scott Ritter made, and he should start acknowledging it, and that's it. So, why? Well, he says that the Americans have, or the NATO has actually, so NATO has supplied weapons and financial assistance to Ukraine. But everybody knew that. They have done it for the last 8 years by training the Ukrainian army and supplying them with weapons. And they still can doing it. And they've been saying it from the start. So the Russians knew precisely what was going on, and they planned for that. And that's why the financial impact or the sanctions that the West has done on Russia is not working. Because that is what they have done. So it's not a game changer. The Russians were aware of all that, and they planned for that type of event. So there is no game changer. And the little weapons and armament they do send is old surplus stock. And Germany is already saying that they can't provide any more weapons to Ukraine because then they have to take their own stock. And as I said in a previous video, the American stock is also being depleted at a huge rate. And one other day they're going to say, no, sorry, that's it. They're also not supplying the most advanced weapon systems. Well, the Ukrainians are not trained to use it, so what's the point? And in any case, it creates a situation where Russia might think that they are actually involved now directly. Well, make no mistake, the Russians know NATO is involved. And they've been warning now for the last 6 months to NATO, don't do it. And NATO still ignores it. And now there's some talk that the Americans are feeling emboldened, that they can supply better weapons. But it seems to me they have learned nothing in the last couple of years. The Russians insisted on a very patient basis not to allow Ukraine to be weaponized or become part of NATO. And America actually ignored them. And then finally Russia sent them a sort of an ultimatum piece of paper where their terms were clearly listed. And those terms were very realistic in December of 2021. And still the West ignored it. And then finally the Russians said, that's it. And the SMO started. Now make no mistake, the way that you look at the history of Putin and Russia, they always try first a diplomatic route. They're always patient. They provide the necessary signals that if you don't stop with it, the matter will escalate. And they are prepared to escalate it. But nobody in the West actually listens. And this will happen in this case as well. So forget about this emboldenedness. That's just arrogance and ignorance. And people that don't learn from the previous mistakes. Then I would also like to talk about the current situation, military situation in Ukraine. One has to stand a little bit back on how the operation started actually, and what the Russians said. They had three clear goals: denazification, protection of the Donbass, and the demilitarization of Ukraine. And the latter actually means the destruction of the Ukrainian army. And one has to keep that in mind. And when they started with this whole operation, we were constantly informed that the Ukrainian army had 8 years of entrenching themselves and build up defensive lines in the occupied Donbass areas, and that an offense by the Russians, well, like I always said, Donbass militia supported by Russian artillery and support. In any case, so they occupied certain areas very quickly, and then they started this operation of attrition with superior artillery and firepower. And that is what they have done for the last 6 months. And they had some successes, but progress was very slow. And one can understand it. Of course, again, you go look at the objective, and that is destruction of the Ukrainian army. That means killing soldiers, destroying the hardware, and making it impossible for the Ukrainian army to really fight back. So that's the objective. And they have done it very successfully. And if you look at the Russian Defense Department's daily reports, they kill a lot of people, they bombed a lot of ammo depots, command centers, and hardware. And that's what we've been doing for the last 6 months. But remember, these guys were there in their entrenched position. While the whole conflict has now been reversed. What is happening is that the Russians now in defense, and the Ukrainians are attacking in their so-called counter-offensive, which is not counter, but an offense. And what does that really mean? It seems to me no analyst is really talking about that. In order to do an offense, you have to storm the position of the enemy. That means you cannot hide in your fortification. You have to get out of your fortification and advance forward. And what is this? That means you are unprotected. And you will suffer losses. Much easier if you would have stayed in your fortifications. So this is actually a benefit to the Russians. Because previously, they battled to, well, I don't like the word, but kill the Ukrainian soldiers in their fortification. It's a very difficult operation. But once you attack, then what's the rule? Well, you have to attack with superior numbers and hardware. And the manpower is there, but the hardware is not there. And the support is not there because the Ukrainians don't have the necessary artillery systems, nor do they have the necessary aviation support. And therefore, they are becoming an easy target for the Russians. And that's a huge benefit for the Russians. Make no mistake about that. Because they are now in their own defensive lines and their own fortification, supported by superior firepower, and the Ukrainian army is being decimated. Now, if you look at daily reports as well, that after the Kherson counter-offensive, the Ukrainian forces had tried to advance, Kharkiv offensive. The Ukrainian military units tried to attack the Russian positions all over the front, and they achieved no advances. They were always fought back and retreated and lost a lot of men and hardware. Precisely what the Russians actually want. So you can call this a turning point in the conflict, but not in a turning point to the advantage of Ukraine, but actually to the disadvantage of the Ukrainian army. Because like I said in the previous video, the outcome of this war has already been decided a long time. It's a futile exercise, which just gets a lot of more people killed unnecessarily. In any case. So, and then we have the second phase. Well, let me first discuss it. Let's discuss something else. So Peter, in any case, mentions he lives in Russia. He reads he talks to his own friends and so on, Russian friends. And he reads telegrams and so on. And we all know there's a general unhappiness around the Russian population. But these things are firstly confined to a certain class of people, like either the middle class that has a little bit of intelligence, or the lower blue-collar ones that are not that much interested, or whatever you want to call it. But it's not the whole of Russia, and it's emotional. Now, what most of these people don't understand is that they are actually insisting that the Russian government should intensify their attack and put more troops into the fight. Now, firstly, like I said, the fighting is being done by the militias and the Chechens, and maybe one or two small groupings of the Russian forces. The rest of the Russian forces are in the support dingers, in the aviation, or in a logistics side, supplying and supporting the militias. If Russia now decides to increase its forces in the Donbass, then most Russian soldiers would die. And do these idiots that are becoming impatient in Russia and becoming emotional, do they even consider that their fellow countrymen will more die? Because if you increase it, then you will attack, and if you attack, you will have more casualties, and you will have more body bags. So these Russians that are so angry and impatient, and they should stop a little bit and think about what they really want. Because death and maiming is a terrible thing. And instead, actually, those guys that want to complain and entice or force the government to increase the whole operation, I would say to them, let you be the first That's volunteers to those dingers. And let the first bullets fly around you and let you learn what is war. And it's no picnic. So that's the other side of things. So I cannot understand how anybody wants to become aggressive and warlike, because war is terrible. In any case, so now we move to the second front. And the second front is not the military one, and we all know it's the economic version. And the economic version is the energy crisis and the food crisis and all the inflation crisis in Europe. And that is ongoing, and it will be catastrophic. And it seems to me that the European leaders, they just can't think for themselves. And they either follow the Americans' instruction to the letter without thinking further, or they are too afraid, or I don't know why they do it. Or, well, I would like to call them stupid, but I'm not so sure if I should do them. Should do that. And for the longer it goes on, and the more patient Putin and the Russians are, the worse this economic disaster will become. The time's on the side of the Russians. There is no need, from an economic point, or the first phase, the military phase, to increase the combat forces, or to start attacking it, or to hasten it, or whatever you want to call it. Doesn't make sense from a military point of view, and you want to save your own soldiers' life as much as possible, because that's a responsibility of the leader of the military command, in spite of what everybody really thinks. And from the second phase, which is the economic phase, there's no need to get a resolution. The longer it goes on, the more chaos there will be in Europe, and that part will also be. So instead of Europe destroying the Russian economy, the Russians are actually now destroying, or the Europeans are actually destroying themselves, and the Russians are letting it happen. So there is no need to escalate the whole thing. The Russians are achieving what they are. This small, cocky counter-offensive is nothing. Ukraine doesn't have the reserves and proper manpower or armament, hardware, to continue that offensive on a Kharkiv. And they will be drawn back. But in the meantime, the Russians have the opportunity to eliminate a lot of hardware and soldiers. You can also see the offenses in the Kherson area, which has quieted down a little bit. But the Ukrainian army achieves nothing, so what's the point? Just carnage. In any case, I will leave a link to the Crosstalk video. You can have a look for yourself in the description here at the bottom of the video. And I'll stop here now. So thanks for listening. If you like the video, press the like button. And if you want to subscribe and listen more, press the subscribe button. And until next time, cheers.